My mom had recently been cleaning her room and found a journal entry of sorts that she had made many years back. This entry was made the day after an event that occurred involving Phil and I, and she said, as she sat me down recently, that she wanted to make sure that she had her facts straight. So she asked me what happened. This is what I told her. It was late that night, maybe sometime around 11. Phil and I were 8 and 9, or 9 and 10, respectively. Anyway, I'd been laying in my bed listening to Dahlia, as I did every night as I tried to get to sleep, when I suddenly heard Phil knocking lightly on my open door and calling out my name in a hushed whisper. I rolled over to face the door and asked him what he was doing, honestly kind of miffed that he was knocking on my door so late at night. "Did you hear anything?" Phil asked in a small, hushed voice. "Like what?" I asked, not taking any particular care to be as quiet as he was as I rubbed the first traces of sleep out of my eyes. Phil wouldn't give me a straight answer, though. He just kept asking in a hushed whisper if I heard anything. So I said almost jokingly, "Yeah, you." Phil winced at how loud my reply was, though I wasn't shouting or anything. He looked behind him at the banister that ran from the other side of his door along the top floor and down to the first set of steps to the opposite side of the house, almost as if he expected a monster to be floating in there, in the midst of the vaulted room on the other side of the banister. "No," again turning his attention to me. "I'm being serious. Did you hear something?" I rolled over again and sort of rolled my eyes. From his previous reaction, I decided it would be better if I at least attempt to keep my voice lowered, just in case there really was something going on. "No, I didn't hear anything." I paused and looked at him. He seemed to turn his attention back to the vaulted room. "Did you hear anything?" I rolled over again and sort of rolled my eyes. From his previous reaction, I decided it would be better if I at least attempt to keep my voice lowered, just in case there really was something going on. "No, I did not hear anything." I paused and looked at him. He seemed to turn his attention back to the vaulted room. "Did you hear anything?" I questioned him, now getting a little worried. Phil never did this. There had to be a reason. He just looked down at my floor in silence, which really made me worry. "Phil, did you hear something?" Phil looked up then and said he thought he heard something, but that he can't be sure now. Please, can I sleep in your room tonight?" The look in his eyes was so sad and so afraid of something that I wished now that I'd said yes then. Instead, I told him to crawl back to his room and lay partway out his doorway. I shuffled out of my low bed and onto the floor, where I then stuck the upper half of my body out my doorway, as he did the same from his. Our bedroom doors were like an inch apart, and we would often shuffle our knees or crawl to one another's rooms if we couldn't sleep and just wanted to talk. We laid there side by side, with only one conjoined bedroom wall between us, and whispered back and forth in voices so hushed we could hardly hear one another. He told me that he thought he had heard a bang, and then the sound of something rustling downstairs. He also said that he thought he heard a voice, but I tried to explain that it was probably our mom and her at the time husband. This did not ease his fear. However, as he then asked what they could possibly be doing, maybe they were just looking for something. Phil and I laid there in silence as we listened to rustling and voices. We quickly and quietly mouthed questions and replies back and forth, trying to make sense of the madness. What we heard then, to the best of our memory, and then the entry written in our mom's journal, is as follows. Rustling like that of paper being looked through, a man with a deep voice, like that of an older man, and a woman who could have been about as old, were talking in hushed tones too quiet for us to pick out any particular words they were saying. The man is upset by something that the woman says, and raises his voice just barely over the mumbling tone he had been using. It only happened for just a split second, as he lightly slams his fist on the table in frustration. Then we hear the woman clearer now. It sounds as though she tells the man to keep it down. A moment of quiet, and we hear the man sigh. Then the woman asks something like, "What about the children? What do we do about the children?" Then we hear a soft third voice, that of another and younger man. Then, from what I remember, Phil and I crept closer to the banister and were trying to get a look at the people we believed to be sitting at the dining room table. It was then that we made up our minds that we could call out for our mom. What followed wasn't the reassuring, "Go back to bed" I expected to hear from our mom, but a harsh whisper from one of the people we hoped against all hope would turn out to be familiar after all. The woman's voice was not that of our mother, however, nor was this voice of any female figure in our lives. Be they family or friends, neither of the man's voices were familiar either. And this, coupled with the sudden silence that befell the main floor, had us panicking. Someone had broken into our house. Phil runs down the stairs and stands on the bottom step, prepared to run back up, as he knocks on our folks' door that sat to the right of the stairs. I stood on the landing above Phil, watching to see if there was any movement in the rooms beyond. Our mom finally answers the door, and Phil hurriedly and tearfully told her what happened. My mom, being the badass she is, immediately went and got a blunt object. Can't remember if it was the slugger or she got the slugger as a precaution after this event. Woke her at the time her husband woke by basically turning him out of their tall bed onto the floor and made him help check the house 10 times over. She discovered that the back door leading to the garage was unlocked, and when everyone had been questioned about it the next day, her at the time husband said that he did not lock it that night. He did not think it was such a big deal, he said. She laughed off the situation and said we were either dreaming or pulling her leg. So naturally the cops were never called. However, due to our persisting and insisting that what we witnessed was real, she sat us down and took down our account of what transpired. It's been about 15 or 16 years now, but both Phil and I recall the story to a T. When asked separately by our mom, she laughed it off then, but after so many years and the fact that we could both recount it so thoroughly changed her mind. The thing is, I hadn't even thought about it until she brought it up, so I apologize if the story falls a little flat after a point. This memory is, after all, about 15 years old, and keep in mind that I'm telling you the uncut version straight from the memory of someone who was at the time only 9 years old. The worst part is, my mom thinks she knows who it was that broke into our house that night, but given that we have no solid proof one way or another, I'm not at liberty to disclose who she now believes them to have been. Let's just say, I hope we never meet. My husband and I were struggling in the city we lived in, so my grandmother offered to help us and move us to the city she lived in. She described it as a small town, cute city. When you look on the website for the city, it truly did look like a small town with good history. We happily accepted the help and got ourselves moved to Kentucky. When we get there, we quickly realized that the city was pretty awful. Anyone from this part of Kentucky will know exactly where I'm talking about, as it's a pretty well-known place. It was a city filled to the brim with meth and violence, and walking around at night wasn't exactly the smartest idea. When we arrived, we got set up with the local Salvation Army, which then eventually was able to set us up at an apartment after we saved up some money. This is where my story takes place. When we first started looking for apartments, we were doing our best to find a decent area to live in. The place we found was settled back from any major parts of the city, and when we were shown the model apartment, it looked amazing. The people coming in and out looked like decent people, just doing their thing. They also had a great deal on rent, so we chose this as our starting point for getting on our feet. When we got the key and apartment number, we were beyond ecstatic, only to find out we were giving the worst building in the entire complex. Our door had at least a 1.5-inch gap from the bottom of the door to the floor, and while the layout was the exact same, the inside was gross. The entire building, as well as the apartment, looked like nobody lived in there for years, and the apartment complex hadn't bothered to tidy or fix up the inside. Our peephole had been painted over, and their fix to that was just to take a key and scratch the paint away. Whatever, we were just happy to be able to finally have a place of our own, and we knew once the year was up, we could leave and never look back. Some of the only good paying work in the area was factory work, and of course the best pay came from working third shift. My fiancé knew we had to keep doing what we had to do, so he worked third shift while I worked daytime at the local Walmart, which meant that I essentially lived alone overnight. We had not had any issues with the few neighbors that trickled in after we moved in, and I lived on the second floor, so I wasn't concerned and just always made sure to double check the locks before bed. One night around 3 a.m. I was messing around with my laptop like I usually did when I had the next day off. All of a sudden, I heard someone banging on my front door. By banging, I mean it sounded like the police were at the door, and the fact I could hear it in my room with the door closed should show how loud it was. I immediately turned the video I was watching off and slowly opened my bedroom door. The only person I knew in this town was my grandma, and she wouldn't bang on my door like that, especially at this time of night. I crept towards the door, super freaked out, and then tried to peek out the peephole without putting my feet in line of the huge gap. All I could see was a dark figure standing at my door since the peephole was scratched up and the lights in my hallway didn't work. I started creeping away towards my room to get my phone, when all of a sudden the person banged on the door again. At this point I was terrified, but hoping that they would go away. There was no way in hell I was opening that door or asking who was there. So I just grabbed my phone and made my way to my dining room, which had a view of the door without being in line of the gap. By the time I made it back to the front of the apartment, I could hear the person messing with my locks and jiggling the handle. I initially froze before dialing 911 and yelled out that I was calling the police. I hoped that that would scare them away, and fortunately for me, it did. I was in tears with the operator until the police finally arrived and looked around the building. After searching, they came to my door to talk to me and basically told me it sounded like someone was drunk and trying to find the right door. My downstairs across neighborhood had come out and told them she heard what was going on and did not sound like someone who was drunk. The footsteps were clear and steady leading up to my door, and apparently after I yelled I was calling the cops, the guy took off down the other side and bolted through the back door. Not to mention, our stairs are pretty steep, so being drunk and sprinting down those stairs would have been quite a feat. She had initially assumed it was my fiancé coming home until she heard the banging on the door. Nothing happened after that incident, and we ended up breaking our lease and getting out of that town shortly after. So to the creep that tried to break into my apartment at 3 a.m. while I was home alone, let's not meet. So this happened in April of 2018. I live in a major city in Texas. My apartment complex is gated and in a good neighborhood, but the security isn't extremely tight. Sometimes the gates are left open, and anyone could piggyback off of someone else entering with the access code. Maybe twice in the past 3 years the management has put out notices of vehicle break-ins or other items being stolen from porches. We also have frequent door-to-door solicitors, even though there are signs forbidding it. Okay, so this particular Friday evening, I go to bed at about 2:30 a.m. For some odd reason, I was having trouble getting to sleep, so I put on a podcast to listen to and eventually start to doze off. I become aware of a noise that sounds like a clicking sound, but it sounds like one of my upstairs neighbors making some noise. I kind of zone this out, as I'm used to my neighbors staying up late on weekends. After about 30 seconds, I realize the noise is extremely repetitive and getting louder. I then start focusing on it more intently, trying to isolate what it could be and where it is coming from. Suddenly, it hits me. It's coming from the entrance to my apartment. I leaped out of bed and head to the foyer. I identify the noise right away. The lock mechanism is moving back and forth rapidly, like someone is trying to unlock the front door. I can hear that an object is inserted into the lock, and the person is jimmying it back and forth with a lot of force. I instinctively turn around, head to my bedside safe, unlock it with a combination, pull up my .357 pistol, load a 14-round magazine, and chamber a hollow point round. I head back to the door, and as I exit the bedroom, I see the lock twist and unlatch. I immediately pointed my weapon straight ahead, knowing that if someone comes through, I will have to make a split-second reaction. I decide that if someone comes through the door, I will give them a momentary chance to retreat, but if they do something other than that, or enter aggressively, I'm going to shoot and ask questions later. They don't enter, however, because I had also locked the deadbolt inside only. When I first moved a year prior, I remember thinking that the deadbolt was a great security feature, and I got in the habit of always keeping it locked when I'm home. In hindsight, this decision saved me from a life or death confrontation. Upon realizing that, I approached the door and looked through the keyhole. On the other side are 3 Asians, 2 men, and 1 woman. All 3 are wearing hoodies, so it's difficult to make out their faces. The men have objects in their hands, but I can't make out exactly what. The 2 men are talking back and forth, probably trying to figure out why they can't open the door, even though they have successfully opened the outside lock at this point. The woman is also talking loudly, such that anyone in the hallway would be able to hear her voice. She's talking in another language. The only words I can make out are apartment 25, and she keeps repeating that over and over like a broken record. Upon hearing that, I start to wonder for a moment if maybe they are just drunk and have the wrong apartment number, but that's impossible. To open my lock, they would have to have a copy of my exact key or some kind of lock-picking device. I've never copied my key or given it to anyone. Here's the other thing. Not only is 250 not my apartment number, but that apartment number doesn't exist anywhere in the complex. Standing back from the door, I take a long broom handle and jab it hard into the face of the door, letting them know that I'm on the other side. They immediately stop fiddling with the lock and take off running. I debate whether to call 911 and decide against it unless they return. I know they'll be long gone by the time anyone gets there. It would be too risky to follow them and try to get a better description or license plate. I don't have enough identifying info as it is to make an arrest. I filed a police report the next day and let the apartment manager know. They said it was unusual, but they would alert the resource officer and ask for a police presence for a couple of nights. Nothing ever came of the report, but that's not a surprise to me. It's been 7 months since this happened, no further incidences. Nobody else in the apartment has reported anything similar happening. I don't think they'll be back, but one precaution I took was to buy a smart lock for the deadbolt. so I can leave the deadbolt always locked from the inside, even when I'm not home. It's crazy to think that the deadbolt was the only thing between myself and an armed confrontation with intruders. They say you don't really know what you'll do in those situations until it really happens, but I can honestly say I am proud of how I stayed calm and was mentally prepared to defend myself. If there's one good thing that came out of this, I feel confident that I responded the right way and was ready for the unthinkable. So 3 a.m. burglars and your female accomplice, let's not meet again. And for your own sake, please find a safer way to make a living. There's nothing in my apartment worth dying for.
Alright, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead, like, share, subscribe, share on Facebook, share on Twitter, share on Instagram. I don't give a shit where you share it, just share it. Thank you for watching.